One of the early crops you'll have a chance to preserve this year will be spinach or other types of greens. Now, one of the things about working with greens is that they tend to compress, and they go from a huge bowl full when you cook them down to a very small amount. And in fact, it takes about 2 pounds of greens to fill 1 pint jar. So you're going to have to work fairly quickly with a lot of greens, and it's going to take you a fair amount of time to clean them. Because spinach has so many crinkles in it and it grows so close to the ground, it often has a lot of dirt and sand in it, so you need to spend a lot of time, usually through 2 or 3 or even 4 washes of water before you make sure you get it out. Lift the greens out of the water rather than let the water drain around it. Otherwise, all the stuff you got off is going to settle right back on. Now, once you get it clean, you need it, as I said, to work in fairly small amounts, generally about 1 pound at a time. And this is about 1 pound of spinach. And we're going to put it into a blancher over boiling water and steam it for somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how much you have and how old it is. If it's very young and tender, you're going to want to steam it the shorter length of time. But we do want to get it hot so that we have it hot to go into the jar, and also so that we get as much air out of it as possible. Otherwise, you're going to have very little spinach in all the jars when you actually get them cooked. So let's put this over in the steamer, let it go for 3 minutes. Once the greens have been steamed, they have softened enough and compressed enough that you can get them in a jar without having a lot of extra space left later on. Now, one of the things you may want to do is can without salt, and that's always an option. If you are deciding to use salt, use a canning or pickling salt that doesn't have the extra additives that may cause cloudiness, and it's 1/4 teaspoon in each of the jars. Put the salt in before you put the food in, because if you put the food in first and then get the headspace right, then when you start to adjust headspace, you'll be taking out part of the salt again. So putting it in first allows it to blend well and make sure that it's all in there together. Jar funnel helps you hit the jar a little bit, and here it's a matter of getting the greens in so that you don't pack them in tightly. Packing them in tightly makes the heat take too long to get to the center. There's been a lot of changes in the processing time for greens in the last few years. Originally, before 1988, the processing time for a quart jar was 90 minutes, and for a pint jar, it was 45 minutes and 35 minutes for a pint jar. In 1988, because greens tend to pack tightly, and because we then have trouble getting the heat to the center of the jar, the processing time was greatly increased to 70 minutes for a pint jar and 90 minutes for a quart jar. This can hold a few more. Notice that of the pound, we're going to have very few left in the container. The headspace on this should be 1 inch. And again, you don't want to push the greens in too tightly, but you want to make sure that you get the jar filled as much as you can. Now, to the top of this, you could use the water that you boiled in. That would tend to make it a little bit cloudier, and you don't lose a lot of nutrients in that water if you're steaming anyway, so that is mostly water. You can also use clear water if you choose to, but you want to add boiling water to this and get the headspace for both the greens and the liquid at the 1 inch mark. Now, remember that jars are marked on their own so that you don't have to hunt down a mark, and that when you adjust and to get the bubbles out, you want to use a plastic knife so that you don't damage the jar as you go. And go around that jar and get out as many of the bubbles as you can. That will prevent boil over inside the canner later on, and you'll get a better quality product. It also reduces the amount of risk of spoilage that you'll have. Now, as I said, the jars are marked so that you know exactly when you've hit the 1 inch mark on these. At the very top, as the screw band begins to go down, this is 1/4 inch. You get to the end of that, if you'd gone all the way around, that would be 1/2 inch, and this lip here is a 1 inch mark. Get down to eye level to check that, just as if you were measuring something, and try and make sure that the food is under the liquid when you start, because it's going to have some changes during the processing time. Now, because there's so many leaves here, it's difficult to make sure you get all the air out, but do your best, and that will reduce loss of liquid in the jar later on. Now, once that's done, we're ready for a flat. You want to make sure that you wipe the rim of the jar with a clean, dry cloth. Probably a paper towel is as good a thing as any. Get it a little bit wet with some clean water and wipe that off. If there's any food or salt or anything like that left on the rim, chances are it's going to prevent the jar from sealing later on. Now, you need a new flat each time you can. Make sure that you follow the directions that come with the manufacturer for each box of flats that you use, because they change each year depending on what kinds of chemicals they've used for this rubber sealing compound. Sometimes they have to be boiled. Sometimes they need to be put under boiling water or have boiling water poured over them for a few minutes. Sometimes they need to be simmered. So make sure that each year you check to make sure you've got the right procedure. You then want to use a screw band that's not rusted or dented or bent, and tighten it firmly tight. Now that's a little bit of a nebulous term, but if you tighten it too much, you can actually cut through that rubber sealing compound and then you don't get a seal. If you don't tighten it enough, you don't get a seal. Sometimes we get them tightened too much and we get something called a washboard effect, where the flat may actually go like this and have a wavy look to it because the air that's in there that's supposed to escape during processing can't. All right, once you get to this stage and you get a full canner load to this stage, you're ready to go in a pressure canner. In the pressure canner, remember, pint jars 70 minutes and quart jars 90 minutes. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.